The global shipping industry is witnessing a transformation that could reshape international commerce for generations to come. In the frozen waters above the world where ice sheets have dominated for millennia, a new maritime corridor is emerging, one that promises to revolutionize how goods move between continents. This is the story of the Arctic shipping routes, a network of waterways that's becoming navigable for the first time in human history thanks to rapidly melting polar ice. It's also the story of an escalating competition between three of the world's most powerful nations, China, Russia, and the United States. Each sees these routes as critical to their economic future and global influence. What began as a collaborative project between Moscow and Beijing has now become a flashpoint in international relations. The United States, under President Donald Trump's renewed administration, has launched an ambitious, some might say audacious, plan to challenge Chinese and Russian dominance in these icy waters. The stakes couldn't be higher, and the investment required is staggering. To understand why the Arctic has suddenly become one of the most contested regions on Earth, we need to explore not just the geography of these routes, but the economics, the military strategy, and the geopolitical chess game unfolding across the top of our planet. The birth of Arctic Express 1, a Sino-Russian Vision. The partnership didn't happen overnight. In June 2024, officials from Russia and China gathered to formalize plans for what they called Arctic Express 1, an initiative that would fundamentally alter global shipping patterns. The vision was ambitious: create a joint fleet of vessels capable of traversing Arctic waters throughout the entire calendar year, not just during brief summer windows when ice temporarily retreats. This wasn't merely a business venture, it represented a strategic alignment between two nations that have grown increasingly close as both face tensions with the West. For China, the Arctic routes offer something invaluable: a shorter, faster path to European markets that bypasses traditional choke points like the Suez Canal. For Russia, which controls vast stretches of Arctic coastline, these routes represent both an economic opportunity and a chance to assert influence over a region it considers part of its sphere of interest. The collaboration quickly moved from planning to implementation. Chinese shipping companies began testing voyages through Arctic waters, gathering data on ice conditions, navigation challenges, and optimal timing. Russian icebreakers escorted these experimental convoys, clearing paths through frozen obstacles. Engineers and maritime experts from both countries worked together to design vessels specifically suited for polar conditions. Ships with reinforced hulls, specialized navigation equipment, and the capability to operate in temperatures that would disable conventional cargo vessels. Today, this collaboration has produced tangible results. The routes connecting East Asia and Southeast Asia to Northern and Western Europe via Arctic waters have become operational, at least on a seasonal basis. Ships loaded with electronics, textiles, machinery, and countless other products have successfully completed journeys that would have been impossible just a decade ago. The maritime industry watches these developments closely, recognizing that what was once considered a far-fetched idea is rapidly becoming commercial reality. The global shipping community has taken notice. These Arctic pathways now represent the shortest oceanic connection between major Asian manufacturing centers and lucrative European consumer markets. The implications for supply chain efficiency, shipping costs, and delivery times are enormous. And that's precisely why the world's attention has turned northward, and why the United States has decided it cannot afford to remain on the sidelines. Trump's 7-route strategy, a new maritime doctrine. When Donald Trump returned to the presidency in January 2025, his administration quickly signaled that global trade routes would be a top priority. In March of that year, the White House released a document that would set the stage for a dramatic shift in American maritime strategy. The title was straightforward but revealing: Special Review of Transit Restrictions on Key International Maritime Traffic Routes. This wasn't standard policy language. It was a declaration of intent. The document identified 7 critical waterways that together carry approximately 80% of global seaborne trade. These weren't random selections. They were the arteries of the world economy. Media, wide shots of Strait of Malacca shipping lanes, Panama Canal container ships, Suez Canal with tankers, Strait of Gibraltar with cargo ships, busy English Channel, Singapore Strait freighters, Arctic icebreaker in action, the Strait of Malacca, through which much of Asia's trade flows, the Panama Canal, connecting the Atlantic and Pacific, the Suez Canal, linking Europe and Asia, the Strait of Gibraltar, gateway to the Mediterranean, the English Channel, one of the world's busiest maritime corridors, the Singapore Strait, a crucial Southeast Asian passage, and finally, the Arctic routes, the newest and potentially most transformative of all. The strategic logic was clear. Whoever controls these waterways holds enormous leverage over international commerce. They can facilitate trade or disrupt it. They can monitor shipping movements, collect transit fees, and enforce regulations. In times of conflict, they can restrict access entirely, turning economic choke points into instruments of geopolitical pressure. For the United States, which has long viewed itself as the guarantor of global maritime freedom, allowing China and Russia to establish dominance over the Arctic routes was unacceptable. The Trump administration moved quickly to translate concern into action. At the end of March 2025, President Trump hosted the President of Finland for high-level discussions at the White House. While multiple topics were on the agenda, one issue dominated the conversation: icebreakers. Specifically, the United States announced its intention to acquire 48 of these specialized vessels, ships designed to crash through thick sea ice, creating navigable channels for other vessels to follow. The number was significant. Russia, the undisputed leader in polar maritime capability, operates 42 icebreakers, more than half of all such vessels in the world. China, despite its growing interest in Arctic navigation, has only 4. The United States currently has even fewer operational icebreakers, most of them aging and in need of replacement. By announcing plans to acquire 48 new icebreakers, the Trump administration was sending an unmistakable message: America intends to become the dominant polar maritime power. The goal isn't simply to match Russian capabilities, it's to surpass them, establishing American leadership in a region where the United States has historically had minimal presence. This wasn't just about commerce. The Arctic has become the new frontier in great power competition, and icebreakers are the key to controlling it. The question now is whether American ambition can be translated into operational reality, and whether the United States can move quickly enough to change the dynamics of a race that China and Russia have already been running for years. Understanding the Arctic routes. 3 corridors to the top of the world. To grasp what's at stake in this competition, we need to understand the geography. The term Arctic routes is actually a simplification. What we're really discussing is a network of 3 distinct maritime corridors, each with its own characteristics, challenges, and strategic importance. These routes aren't modern discoveries. Russian and Soviet explorers identified them more than a century ago, recognizing their theoretical potential even when ice made them practically unusable. For generations, they remained curiosities on maps, occasionally attempted by adventurous expeditions, but never viable for commercial shipping. The ice was simply too thick, too persistent, too dangerous. But the Earth's climate has been changing, and nowhere is that more evident than in the Arctic. Rising global temperatures have accelerated the melting of polar ice sheets, particularly during summer months. What was once solid ice year-round now becomes open water or navigable slush for weeks or even months at a time. This transformation, driven by climate change, has suddenly made these routes commercially feasible for the first time in human history. Let's examine each route individually, because understanding their differences is essential to understanding the competition unfolding around them. The Northern Sea Route stretches approximately 5,600 kilometers, running from the Bering Strait in the Pacific, along Russia's northern coastline, to the Barents Sea in the Atlantic. This is the route over which Russia exercises the most control. Moscow considers these waters to be, in effect, Russian territory, domestic waters rather than international passages. Russia's claim isn't baseless. The route follows the contours of Russian landmasses, passing through waters that have historically been frozen and inaccessible. Along this corridor, Russia has developed more than a dozen significant ports and over 100 berths capable of servicing commercial vessels. The infrastructure extends beyond ports. Russia has established refueling stations, rescue facilities, and communication networks along the entire length of the route. But Russia's presence isn't merely civilian. The Northern Sea Route is protected by serious military hardware. The S-400 air defense system, one of Russia's most sophisticated anti-aircraft weapons, has been deployed at strategic points along the corridor. Bastion coastal defense systems, designed to destroy ships that venture too close to shore, have been positioned at key locations. Ground forces maintain a permanent presence in the region, ready to respond to any perceived threats. This militarization serves a purpose beyond defense. It reinforces Russia's message that this route operates under Russian rules. Ships wishing to transit the Northern Sea Route must notify Russian authorities in advance. They must receive permission, and they must pay. Tolls ranging from $100,000 to $200,000 per vessel, depending on the ship's size and cargo. These aren't suggestions. They're requirements enforced by the Russian Navy and Coast Guard. For shipping companies, however, the costs are worth it. Vessels traveling from East Asia to Europe via the Northern Sea Route can reduce their journey by approximately 40% compared to the traditional route through the Suez Canal. That translates to 10 to 15 days of saved sailing time, which means lower fuel costs, reduced crew expenses, faster delivery times, and the ability to complete more voyages annually. In an industry where margins are often razor-thin, these advantages are transformative. The Transpolar Sea Route takes a different path. Rather than hugging coastlines, it cuts directly across the center of the Arctic Ocean, passing near the North Pole itself. The distance is shorter, roughly 4,500 kilometers from the Bering Strait to the North Atlantic, but the challenges are greater. This route passes through international waters, the high seas where no nation can claim territorial control. In theory, any ship from any country should be able to transit freely without paying tolls or seeking permission. The reality, however, is more complex. The route passes through Russia's exclusive economic zone, the area extending 200 nautical miles from its coastline, where Moscow has special rights to exploit resources. More significantly, the Transpolar Sea Route encounters ice conditions more severe than any other Arctic corridor. Because it ventures closer to the North Pole, where temperatures remain coldest, the ice is thicker, averaging 3 to 4 meters in depth. Without support from heavy-duty icebreakers, this route remains impassable even during summer months. With icebreakers, it becomes possible, but only with the most powerful vessels available, and only at great expense. Russia has not yet established regular icebreaking services along the Transpolar Sea Route. The costs of maintaining such a service, given the extreme ice conditions, would be enormous. Yet this route is widely considered the most promising of the 3 Arctic corridors. If ice continues to thin and icebreaker technology continues to improve, the Transpolar Sea Route could eventually become the premier Arctic shipping lane, the fastest, most direct connection between Asia and the Atlantic. That potential is why this route has become a focal point of international competition. No country currently controls it. The nation that establishes dominance here, through icebreaker capability, through infrastructure investment, or through international maritime regulations, could shape global shipping patterns for decades to come. The Northwest Passage presents yet another set of circumstances. Stretching approximately 5,800 kilometers from the Bering Strait through the Canadian Arctic archipelago to Baffin Bay and the Atlantic Ocean, this route passes through waters that Canada considers its internal waters, essentially Canadian territory. The United States and European Union dispute this claim, arguing that the Northwest Passage qualifies as an international strait that should be open to vessels from all nations without Canadian restrictions. This disagreement has simmered for years, occasionally flaring into diplomatic tensions but never escalating to serious conflict. Both sides have maintained their positions without resolution. The ice conditions in the Northwest Passage are somewhat less severe than the transpolar sea route, but still formidable, typically 2 to 3 meters thick. The route's geography adds another layer of difficulty. Ships must navigate through narrow channels between islands, where floating ice accumulates and shifting conditions can trap unwary vessels. Even during optimal summer months, the passage demands careful navigation and often icebreaker assistance. Infrastructure along the Northwest Passage remains limited. Unlike Russia's well-developed northern sea route, the Canadian Arctic lacks major ports, supply stations, or rescue facilities. Canada operates 7 icebreakers, but none qualify as heavy icebreakers capable of dealing with the thickest ice conditions. This means Canada cannot provide regular icebreaking services along the entire route, leaving much of the passage unmaintained and unpredictable. For shipping companies, this creates a dilemma. The Northwest Passage offers similar distance savings compared to the Panama Canal route, roughly 40% shorter for voyages between Asia and the east coast of North America. But the lack of infrastructure, the navigation challenges, and the uncertain ice conditions introduce risks that offset the potential benefits. Few commercial carriers have been willing to use the Northwest Passage regularly. For the United States, however, the Northwest Passage holds special appeal. It provides direct access to American territory on the East Coast, without passing through areas controlled by Russia or other potentially hostile powers. If the United States could establish dominance over this route, either through agreement with Canada or through independent American icebreaker operations, it would gain a strategic advantage in Arctic commerce and military mobility. The economics of ice. Why these routes matter. Numbers tell part of the story. In the early 21st century, the Arctic routes carried virtually no commercial cargo. The ice was too thick, the risks too high, the infrastructure too undeveloped. Ships occasionally attempted Arctic transits, but these were exceptional voyages, not routine commercial operations. By 2014, the situation had changed dramatically. Total cargo volume through Arctic routes reached 36 million tons that year, a remarkable increase driven primarily by Chinese shipping companies testing the waters and Russian energy exports finding new paths to market. Chinese vessels accounted for the majority of this traffic, reflecting China's position as the world's largest trading nation and its keen interest in more efficient routes to European customers. Russia recognized the opportunity. As ice continued to melt and Chinese interest grew, Moscow understood that it possessed something valuable: control over the northern sea route, the most developed and accessible of the Arctic corridors. In 2017, Russia formally invited China to participate in developing Arctic infrastructure, proposing a partnership that would leverage Chinese investment and shipbuilding capacity with Russian geographical advantages and icebreaker expertise. The invitation wasn't altruistic. Russia needed China's participation to realize the Arctic route's full potential. Developing the necessary infrastructure, ports, refueling stations, rescue facilities, navigation systems requires enormous capital investment. Russia, despite its Arctic expertise, lacked the financial resources to build everything alone, especially while facing Western sanctions related to Ukraine and other conflicts. China, flush with capital and eager for new markets, proved a willing partner. The collaboration accelerated rapidly. Chinese and Russian engineers worked together on ice-capable vessel designs. Chinese shipyards, among the world's most productive, began constructing specialized cargo ships and icebreakers. Russian crews trained Chinese navigators in polar conditions. Investment flowed into Arctic infrastructure projects. By 2024, the results were visible. China had successfully assembled a fleet of ice-breaking vessels capable of year-round Arctic operations, a remarkable achievement for a nation that just 2 decades earlier had virtually no polar maritime capability. Joint Russian-Chinese projections suggest that, by 2027, the Arctic routes could support continuous year-round commercial shipping, not just seasonal operations dependent on summer ice melts. Russia's ambitions extend even further. Moscow has set a target of 150 million tons of annual cargo through Arctic routes by 2035, more than 4 times the 2014 volume. This isn't fantasy. If current trends continue, if ice keeps melting, if infrastructure keeps improving, this target could be achievable, and it would represent a fundamental shift in global shipping patterns, redirecting billions of dollars of trade away from traditional routes controlled by other powers. The economic implications ripple outward. Shipping companies could save enormous sums on fuel, time, and operational costs. Asian manufacturers could reach European markets faster and cheaper. Russian ports in the Arctic could become major commercial hubs, generating revenue and employment. China could reduce its dependence on vulnerable maritime choke points in Southeast Asia and the Middle East. But there's another side to this equation. If the Arctic routes succeed, traditional routes decline in relative importance. The Suez Canal, which generates billions in annual revenue for Egypt, would see reduced traffic. The ports of Singapore, which have built their prosperity on being an essential waypoint between Asia and Europe, would face competition from a route that bypasses them entirely. Countries that have benefited from their positions along traditional shipping lanes could find their strategic value diminished. This is why the competition for Arctic dominance is so intense. We're not simply discussing alternative routes for moving cargo. We're discussing a potential reorganization of global trade geography, with winners and losers that will be determined in the coming years by decisions made today. America's Icebreaker Challenge. Can it be done? The plan sounds straightforward enough. Build 48 icebreakers, deploy them strategically throughout Arctic and Antarctic waters, and use them to establish American presence and influence in polar regions. The reality, however, is vastly more complicated. First, consider the division of labor. According to assessments from the Trump administration, these 48 vessels would need to be distributed across multiple missions. Approximately 15 to 20 ships would be dedicated to Arctic route maintenance and patrol, the core competitive function against Russia and China. Another 5 to 7 would support American Antarctic research stations, which require regular resupply voyages through frozen waters. The remaining vessels, perhaps 10 to 12, would handle Arctic development tasks, servicing offshore oil platforms, opening commercial shipping lanes, transporting materials and personnel for new port construction, and establishing supply stations in remote locations. This distribution reveals the scale of America's current deficit. The United States currently operates only a handful of aging icebreakers, most of which struggle with reliability issues. Russia, by contrast, has built and maintained its icebreaker fleet over decades, developing the expertise, infrastructure, and industrial capacity to sustain these complex vessels. China, though newer to the field, has ramped up its capabilities with remarkable speed, leveraging its massive shipbuilding industry to produce modern icebreakers in increasingly short time frames. The technical challenges are substantial. Icebreakers aren't simply ships with stronger hulls. They require specialized design features, bow shapes optimized for riding up onto ice and crushing it with the ship's weight, propulsion systems powerful enough to push through resistant ice, hull materials that can withstand repeated impacts without fracturing, and ballast systems that can rapidly shift weight to help rock the ship free when it gets stuck. Modern icebreakers also need sophisticated navigation equipment capable of detecting ice thickness ahead, communication systems that function in polar conditions where traditional technology often fails, and living quarters designed for crews spending weeks or months in extreme cold. These vessels cost hundreds of millions of dollars each, require years to design and build, and demand highly specialized construction facilities. Finland has emerged as the world leader in icebreaker construction, producing roughly 60% of all such vessels globally. Finnish shipyards have accumulated decades of expertise in polar vessel design, and Finnish engineers are considered the gold standard in the field, but Finland's total shipbuilding capacity is limited. The country has fewer major shipyards than giants like China, South Korea, or Japan. If the United States were to order all 48 icebreakers from Finland, it would overwhelm the Finnish industry. Based on current construction rates, Chinese shipyards can complete an icebreaker in approximately 165 days, roughly 5.5 months. At that pace, building 48 vessels sequentially would require 21 years. Even if multiple ships were built simultaneously across different yards, the timeline would still span at least a decade, possibly much longer. And time is a critical factor. The Arctic routes aren't waiting for America to build its fleet. They're being developed and operationalized now. By 2030, Chinese and Russian projections indicate that regular year-round commercial shipping through Arctic waters will be fully established. If those projections prove accurate, by the time the United States completes its icebreaker fleet, the competitive landscape will have already been